Mr. Papst, Chris, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing well.
Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Looking forward to it. So we're going to have a great conversation about education, specifically in Baltimore, this great book that you wrote, this great work that you've done, the education system nationally. It's going to be an interesting insight into maybe the Trump administration and the political divide generally. So I'm really looking forward to being educated about all that and getting to know you. But could you first just tell me a little bit about yourself? Give me your background if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. I'm from southeastern Pennsylvania, a little town about an hour west of Philadelphia called Elverson. Type of town where there's more cows than people, like that type of environment. 4-wheel drives,
Nice.
fishing, that kind of thing.
Sweet. A
Growing
lot of
up,
Kid Rock.
excuse me.
A lot of Kid Rock.
Yeah, a lot of Kid Rock. Yeah, Devil Without a Cause came out in 1998. Very well aware. Yeah, great album. So my dad was a public school teacher for 35 years in the teachers union. My brother and I grew up K through 12 education. For college, I went to University of Pittsburgh, played baseball there for 4 years. And after I graduated, I started writing for newspapers, which was my first intro into journalism. And this was 2002. And about that time, the internet was coming on and a lot of newspapers were going out of business. So I thought to myself that newspapers might not be the best 30 or 40-year career path. So I went to Temple University, got a master's in broadcasting. And after writing for newspapers for a couple of years, I started my broadcasting career. And in broadcasting, in TV news, it's the type of thing where you go to a really small market. You make your mistakes, you groom yourself, you learn how to write and present yourself, and you work your way up. Yeah, exactly. Exactly the path that I took. So I started in Casper, Wyoming, and then I was a reporter there for the NBC News affiliate in Anchor. Then I went to Madison, Wisconsin for 3 years. And then I went to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania for 4 years, which is where I started doing the investigative reporting, which is something that you sort of have to hone the other skills first before you get into that realm. And from there, in 2014, I got my big break and I went to Washington, D.C., and I started the I team, the investigative team for the ABC News affiliate there. And then in January of 2017, I got this call from Fox 45 News' parent company, which is Sinclair Broadcast Group. And they said, hey, we have this idea for something called Project Baltimore. Is it something that you'd be interested in? And what Project Baltimore is that we are a team of 5. There's 2 photographer editors, there's 2 producers and myself as the reporter, and we focus on one topic. And starting in January of 2017, so 9 years ago, we started this. And the topic that we started with, that we're still at today, is public education. And we chose public education because back in 2017, at the time, we could see that Baltimore City Public Schools, using federal data, was one of the most funded large school systems in America. And we could also see, using federal data, that Baltimore City Schools was one of the lowest performing large school systems in America. And that was really the question that we set out to answer. How can this happen? How can, year after year, you have this incredibly expensive public school system that is one of the lowest performing in America and the lowest performing in Maryland? And that was what started Project Baltimore. And what happened was 8 years later, I wrote my book, Failure Factory, How Baltimore City Public Schools Deprive Taxpayers and Students of a Future, because I wanted to show America and I want to be able to show people around the country what is really happening inside of these public schools, how your dollars are being spent, how data is being manipulated, how the school systems don't want to release public records because they know what they're doing inside of those schools. So this book is really 8 years of Project Baltimore's reporting in one place, but it doesn't just affect Baltimore. This affects the entire country.
Interesting. So you're a ball player, son of a public school teacher, had a reporter's itch to be a reporter from a young age.
Yep.
And could I ask a random question backing up real quick, and then I want to get right to the topic at hand. But
yeah,
what are those skills that come later as an investigative reporter that you need later? What are those additional skills? Just curious.
So in the very beginning, when you start getting into broadcasting, you got to work on your presentation, work on your voice, work on your writing.
Right.
You got to work on your style for how you formulate stories, how you ask questions. You guys you've seen the local television reporter in the two shot asking questions. You develop all
Mm.
those skills. You develop sources and how to keep organizational track of what you're doing. And then once you do that, if you want to go into the investigative realm, this is when the legalese really comes into play. Understanding how to file public records requests, understanding what your rights are in certain states concerning undercover cameras or undercover audio, how to do all of that stuff, how to do it legally so you don't get sued, what you can and can't say in stories, being able to dig into data. A lot of what we do and a lot of what Failure Factory is taking massive amounts of educational data that to the average person doesn't make any sense, probably by design, and then being able to take that data and formulate it and put it into an understandable place and then show people what the data means. And doing things like that is really difficult. And taking tens of thousands of data points and being able to extrapolate reports out of that by finding outliers is certainly a skill that takes years to perfect. But it's a great job. I really enjoy it. I feel that we're doing good work. I feel like we're making a difference. And I think if you read Failure Factory, hopefully you'd agree.
So you brought a lot of those skills into your investigation of the Baltimore school system. I would assume a lot of that carried over. Can you maybe give
Oh,
me, tell me a little bit about that.
sure. So when we started in January of 2017, and the book starts in 2017 and goes through 2025, I didn't know anybody. I'd never been in Baltimore. I never lived in Baltimore. And what a lot of investigative reporters do, what I certainly do, is when I need a story, I go for data. So what I had done, and I went into the state websites, and there's about 165 schools in Baltimore City at the time. And I took the state test scores, math and English, for every single school. And the way that it was put on these spreadsheets didn't make any sense. It's just a ton of data thrown up on a website.
Right.
And so I took 40 hours. I took 40 hours. It took an entire week.
Amazing that it was actually there, though.
Yeah, it was all
Right.
there. But it didn't make any sense. So I had to
Right.
organize it. And when I did all that and I started looking at the data, I found that there were 6 entire schools in Baltimore City, 6, that did not have a single student test proficient in anything, math or reading. Hundreds of kids in 6 schools, not one of those students was proficient in any subject. So in mid 2017, that was Project Baltimore's first big story. And when we reported it, it went viral, as it should. Like, that's a really alarming statistic.
Right. Yeah.
And that in and of itself was something that earlier in my career I wouldn't have been able to do because I wouldn't have understood how to do it. And after we did that story, kind of is where the next part of the investigative reporter skills sort of come in, where I had people reaching out to me that worked for Baltimore City Schools who had seen that report and said, you're right, but you understand these kids are still graduating. And I was like, how are these kids graduating? And they would say, well, because someone's going into my grade book and changing the failing grade to passing. So this student
Holy
matriculates through the grades and eventually graduates. And at first I thought these teachers have to be, exaggerating. But I had more teachers coming to me and I would interview them. And I interviewed the teachers are in the book. I put those teachers in this book so you can see for yourself what they were saying. And as it started piling up and more people were coming out, in the fall of 2017, I filed a public records request with Baltimore City Public Schools. And I asked for documents, emails, internal investigations related to grade changing. Well, City Schools wrote me back and they said, nah, we're not going to give you anything. And I automatically knew that that was illegal. So we sued them. And in December of 2017, we sued Project Baltimore, Fox 45 News, sued Baltimore City Public Schools for violating Maryland's Public Information Act. And this has ended up being a 5-year investigation, and it's heavily detailed in Failure Factory. And I'll just kind of go through some of the points here. In February of 2019, the case went to court. It went before a Baltimore City Circuit Court judge. And I testified for a couple hours that day. And then in March of 2019, the judge issued her ruling. And she ruled that Baltimore City Public Schools willfully and knowingly violated the law by not handing over the documents. What the judge said was that city schools knew what it was doing was illegal, but they did it anyway. And the judge said she thinks they did it to hide possible wrongdoing. And the judge really issued a smackdown on city schools and said, listen, this never should have happened. This court case never should have happened. You should have given Mr. Papst the documents as soon as he requested them. You, Baltimore City Schools, you got to pay Fox 45's legal fees. So they paid about $200,000 of our legal fees, which means taxpayers paid about $200,000 of our legal fees because Baltimore City Public Schools did not want to release public records regarding how they were changing failing grades to passing so that kids could graduate. And when we finally got the documents, that's exactly what it showed. We got 8,000 emails, many of them from teachers, asking their administrators, hey, quit changing my grade. The kid didn't pass my course. Why did you go into my grade book and do it? And, the Inspector General for Education.
That's a smoking gun.
There were a lot of emails like that. I mean, there's lots of them. This was a systemic problem throughout the entire school system. And then in 2022, which is now 5 years after I first filed the public records request, the Maryland Inspector General for Education completed his investigation, which he launched after we won the lawsuit. And he found over a 4-year period, there were 12,542 improper grade changes. 12,542. Failing grades changed to passing. Kids didn't do any extra work. They didn't take any extra tests. The grades were just changed. And the Inspector General for Education found that there were upwards of 10% of schools where the kids, or 10% of kids in schools where they were graduating who should not have graduated. I mean, it sounds like fraud, right? I mean, a high school diploma is a state-issued document. And
it does. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, these are the types of things that are happening in our public schools. And because of Project Baltimore, and simply because we're focused on this one topic, we're able to reveal this stuff. But the reason I really wrote this book was to show people how this could be potentially happening in your school system and what to look for, the things that you should look for to really begin to identify that your school system is struggling academically.
Yeah, I was going to say, the average person, why should we care about if it's 10% graduating, if it's 10% fluff, is that enough for me to care about?
Yeah, it is, because your local school system affects everything. It affects crime. We know that a majority of people who end up in jail are undereducated, are not reading and doing math at the levels that they should be. We know that the public school system impacts unemployment rates. It impacts the economy and the availability of jobs. It impacts employers trying to hire people so that they can grow. It impacts the education of the people who are voting for the elected officials that are leading our local municipalities, states, and federal government. The quality of the public education system in America, in my view, is the single most important issue that we can focus on because it directly affects every other societal issue.
What did you think? Was it destiny? Do you think that you'd get into this issue so hard with your dad in this field? He must, I don't mean to ask you about your father, but that's interesting, right?
Yeah. So he retired in 2008. And he started in 1973, retired in 2008 after 35 years. And I didn't start this until 9 years later. And so much really had changed in those 9 years. And just a perfect example. My father was a woodshop teacher.
Oh my God.
There's no woodshop.
I had woodshop. I was the last, you know, when you referenced the Kid Rock thing, and you said something, I think before we recorded, that this guy has like real good pop culture, a little older than me. And I just had woodshop in my mind as we've been speaking, like, and it's so funny that it came out. Yeah, I think I was a dying breed, the last generation that got woodshop.
Yeah. So when my dad retired in 2008, as 35 years of woodshop, they didn't replace him. So that I grew up in a wood shop, and I mean, what better way? I mean, not just to grow up in it.
You got all your fingers?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, they're all right there. You know, so like you have this class, and every kid loves wood shop. You know, and they took it away. But just like in those 9 years between 2008 when he retired and 2017 when I started this job, so much had changed in public education, and now we're talking about it, and he's been retired for 18 years.
So what are those big changes that you noticed in that time?
Well, first off, woodshop's gone. I mean, even the thing that he taught is gone. But to mention some other things that have significantly changed, one's discipline. Students are not disciplined the way that they used to be. The control that teachers have of their classrooms has significantly diminished. Teachers are not given the authority to be able to hold students accountable and to discipline them. Another thing that's changed significantly is the amount of funding that is going into these school systems. It has astronomically increased, but the student outcomes have not. They've remained largely static. Can I just go over a couple data points here just to kind of enforce that?
Please.
So in 2017, when we started Project Baltimore City Public Schools had a $1.3 billion budget.
Keep going. Yeah, sorry.
In 2024, that school year, which is 8 school years later, the school system had a $1.7 billion budget. So the budget for Baltimore City schools went up $400 million a year in those 8 school years. That's about a 30% increase in funding. In 2017, when Failure Factory starts, Baltimore City's graduation rate was 70%. The graduation rate in 2024 was 70%. The school system got 400 million additional tax dollars, and the graduation rate didn't change. The math proficiency rate, many people would agree, is in today's world, is an extremely important skill to have. In 2017, Baltimore City's math proficiency rate was 11%. In 2024, after a 30% increase in funding, it was 10%. 90% of the kids in Baltimore City public schools are not proficient in math with a $1.7 billion budget. Now, to put that into perspective, there's about 76,000, 75,000 kids that attend Baltimore City public schools. You're talking around $22,000 to $23,000 a kid. That is a private school education for every single kid in Baltimore City public schools, and 90% of them are not proficient in math. And Brian, that is why I wrote Failure Factory, because that is alarming. Not only is it bankrupting the city and bankrupting the state and causing taxpayers to spend massive amounts of money, but it's also bankrupting the city, state, and taxpayers on the other end, because as we talked about, incarceration rates go up, crime goes up, poverty goes up, the amount of people that are on government entitlements go up. All of it goes back to the public education system. And it's not just Baltimore. It's the entire country that is going through this, because you asked what has really changed. And here's the main thing that has changed. It has been my experience in talking to teachers, administrators, looking at the data and really studying this, that public education no longer prioritizes the education of kids. It prioritizes the acquisition of funding and then using that funding to hire adults that grows the political power and influence of the public education system, that it then lobbies politicians to get more funding. And all you have to do, and I lay it all out in Failure Factory, don't even take my word for it. Look at the data. All of the data in here is sourced from the Maryland State Department of Education, the U.S. Department of Education, and Baltimore City Public Schools. And I put all the data there right in front of you. And you can look at it, just like we just talked about. How can you have 70% of your kids graduating, but 10% of your kids are proficient in math? Think about that for a second. 70% are graduating, 10% are proficient in math. How does it happen? It happens because the school system isn't prioritizing the education.
Either I'm one of those 10% or something isn't right.
Yeah, you're one of those 10% or something isn't right. And the answer is something isn't right.
Thank God. Oh my goodness. No, that is harrowing. So does Trump, without even necessarily, I mean, feel free to go give me your colorful opinion on Trump and all that, but without even needing to go there, on the issue of education, is Trump with Linda McMahon, do they have the right approach?
Well, I'm a journalist, so I attempt to try to not give my opinion too much, which is why the book has a lot of data in it, because I'm showing you, I'm not telling you. And in my experience, I'm just explaining what I have seen. So let's talk about the U.S. Department of Education. I interviewed Secretary Linda McMahon last month, and we did 2 stories with her. And one of them obviously was a dismantling of the U.S. Department of Education. And this is a really interesting topic because there's a lot of information out there. And I don't know if a lot of people really understand what the U.S. Department of Education does. So I'm just going to lay it out for you. The U.S. Department of Education does not approve any curriculum throughout America. Local school systems approve their curriculum. States approve curriculum. The federal government does not hire teachers. It does not hire administrators. It does not hire principals, assistant principals, superintendents. It doesn't do any of that. The U.S. Department of Education's role in local school systems is already very, very minimal. It has very little contact. I'll give you a perfect example. So IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. If there is a potential violation of that, a student has an IEP, for example, that's being violated, an individualized educational program. If there's a violation of that, that's a federal law. The states investigate it. So the U.S. Department of Education is so disconnected from local education, they don't even investigate federal education law violations. That is done by the states. So what does the U.S. Department of Education really do? Well, they distribute money. Most of it is Title I funds going to high concentration of poverty schools and high concentration of poverty students, and also funding for students with disabilities, IEPs. It also distributes other funding through Pell Grants and things like that. So it's mostly taking in tax dollars and then redistributing those tax dollars. That is what the U.S. Department of Education mostly does. Now, there's other things it does. It does testing, like the National Assessment of Educational Progress, so that we can see how the different states are doing as far as proficiencies and comparing state to state. But most of what it does is really take the money and redistribute it. And what Secretary McMahon and what President Trump are saying is, why do we need that middleman? Why can't we just take the money and give it right to the states? And you don't have to have 4,000 Department of Education employees that are getting 6-figure salaries with good pensions and good health care. Like, why do you need that middleman? Just give the money right to the states. They'll get more money that way so that they can spend it on whatever they feel like they have to spend it on. So it's more block granted in that type of context. So when President Trump took office, there were 4,000 roughly U.S. Department of Education employees. Today, there's 2,000. And I personally have 2 kids in public school. And I cannot tell you that I have seen any difference at all with 2,000 fewer U.S. Department of Education employees. And I can even tell you that I do this every day for a living, report on public schools and public education. I've never had anybody complain to me about it. I've never had a
Mm.
principal. I've never had a school superintendent. I've
You're
never had
saying it was
anybody.
like Thanos.
Yeah. So like there's 2,000 fewer employees and nobody would know. So
Mm.
if the idea is really to get down to 0 employees, which I think the idea is, and the concept is that they want to take the different things that the US Department of Education does and give them to other departments like the Treasury Department to distribute Pell Grants and things like that, would we
Mm.
even know? And I think that there's an argument to be made that if we actually did get rid of the US Department of Education altogether, that we wouldn't even realize it, not at the local level. Now, of course, those 4,000 people that work for the department, they would know because they're not going to have a job. But as
Sure.
far as the local level and local education, I would argue that we wouldn't even realize it.
Interesting. Do you have any comments on Doge as a journalist? How those numbers look to you as a whole?
Well, I mean, that's part of what we kind of fashion ourselves as doing. So everything that we do involves tax dollars. And for 8 years, 9 years that we've been doing Project Baltimore, and the 8 years of this book is following the tax dollars. It's showing taxpayers how their money is being spent and what it's being spent on. And in many instances, how it's being wasted and how the taxpayers are not getting a return on that investment. Like we just talked about a few minutes ago, you have $1.7 billion going into a school system,
Right.
and 10% of your kids are proficient in math. Doge is this type of thing where, investigative journalists have been doing this type of thing for quite some time. And we do it very efficiently. Now, a lot of that investigative reporting is done at the local level like we do. So if you live in Baltimore, if you live in Maryland, you've probably have seen our work or heard of our work. Or you've seen headlines that we have done, and a lot of those headlines have gone national. They've really gotten out there and gone viral, like the 6 schools that we talked about with no kids proficient in
Yeah.
anything, because they're so alarming. But there's people like me, people that do Project Baltimore stuff all around the country that are really investigating those local issues. So from a
Right.
government accountability standpoint, I would think that an investigative journalist would at least appreciate what Doge is attempting to do.
Got it. Makes sense. So the vision you're saying from the Trump administration is cut out the middleman. They and truly they intend for the state schools to receive the same amount of money
No, they get
and
more.
more. They truly intend that. So
Yeah.
wow, that's an interesting revelation for someone who might be
Well,
inherently reactively against it.
I mean, think about it. So if, let's say you got $10, okay, and the Treasury collects your tax dollars, has $10, and they give it to the U.S. Department of Education. The U.S. Department of Education is going to take $1 because they got to pay their employees, and then they're going to give the other $9 to the states.
Right.
And what the Trump administration is saying is, why does the U.S. Department of Education have to take $1? Why do they got to take 10%? Let's just give all 100% to the states.
And so does that solve the problem? If the states now get 10%, great. We've become more efficient at the federal level. Great. But does that solve the problem?
No. So when I was interviewing Secretary McMahon, I asked her that similar question right there. I said, well, if your concept here is to return public education to the local municipalities, what do you do with a school system like Baltimore City? A school system that has already shown over years that it does not do a very good job locally educating the kids. Everything that we talk about in Failure Factory, grade
All
manipulation,
the whopping statistics, the mind blowing.
all these mind-blowing statistics that are out there for the school. Why would you give them more authority? And her answer to me was, the only people that can fix local education are the local people in the community. And I think to a certain extent, she's right. So I'm from a little town, as I mentioned, in southeastern Pennsylvania. If there was a story that came out that my local elementary school did not have any kids proficient in any state testing, there'd be pitchforks You go to
Right.
the next school board meeting, there'd be like 200 parents there going, all right, superintendent, you're gone. Principal, you're gone. Assistant principal, you're gone. Maybe every teacher, you're gone. If we had results that were that terrible. But in Baltimore City, that doesn't happen. The superintendent, actually, she's a CEO. They don't call her a superintendent. The CEO of Baltimore City Public Schools
Mm.
started on July 1st of 2016, about 6 months before Project Baltimore began. Everything that we have mentioned on this show, she's still there, violating public records law, having to pay us $200,000 because she refused to hand over public documents. 6 schools, no kids proficient. Graduation rate didn't budge over 8 years despite a 30% increase in funding. 12,542 improper grade changes, 10% of kids at some schools graduating who should not have. That superintendent is still there. And that is Secretary McMahon's argument. If you're going to have local jurisdictions that are going to tolerate that type of lack of education, there's nothing the federal government can do anyway. That's her argument.
Right. And I buy that. And it feeds into your point earlier about take the what has she somehow we've put handcuffs on. Let people enforce standards. Somehow the standards have corroded. And I think that's the basic point.
Well,
But
the somehow is answered in Failure Factory. The somehow is because public education is not prioritizing the education of students, is prioritizing the acquisition of funding, because so much money is now going into public education. It is an astounding amount of money. I live in Baltimore County. I live in between Baltimore City and the Pennsylvania line in Baltimore County. And over half of every dollar that I give to my county in taxes goes to the public school system. It's more than 50% of the entire budget. That is how much is going into public education. And we have a nearly $3 billion budget in Baltimore County public schools. $3 billion. And when you start talking about numbers that big, you start talking about people who are getting into public education, not maybe for the right reasons, not to educate kids, but to acquire wealth. And I still do believe that teachers are getting into this profession because they want to help the kids. They want to raise them. They want to elevate them. And especially in cities like Baltimore, they want to give them opportunity to move up. But there's an awful lot of people that are getting into public education because they see a $3 billion budget or a $1.7 billion budget. And they're like, yeah, I'm going to get some of that.
And how do you avoid that? That's just the nature of a huge corporation, huh?
Well, you avoid it when you have public officials and the community that are demanding that the school system produce students that are better educated. You're not getting that in Baltimore. I mean, think about it. We talked about those 8 years that Failure Factory covers, and the graduation rate didn't go up with a 30% increase in funding. It happens because it's allowed to happen. It happens because the elected officials in Baltimore City are not forcing the school system to do better. And you have the same superintendent, the same CEO who's been there the entire time. And she makes nearly $500,000 a year. I break down her contract and her budget in the book. And one of the things that I show people is that when you look at a superintendent, a school superintendent's salary, that is not the entire picture, because what they've started doing is that instead of giving a superintendent $500,000 a year to run your school system, they give them $300,000 a year, and then they throw in $200,000 in perks that you would have to read their contract in order to understand. Well, in Failure Factory, I do that, and I show you how to read the contract to see how much your superintendent's actually making. So if you just go and look at the basic raw number, the CEO of Baltimore City Schools makes about $330,000 a year, but total compensation with everything, which are car allowances, annuities, external retirement funds, massive amounts of vacation days that are clearly never being used simply so they can cash them in at the end of the year. She's at like $500,000 a year. So you get like $500,000 a year in total compensation. and
Right.
10% of your kids are proficient in math, and you've had
Right.
this job for 10 years,
I
9,
see.
10
I see.
years.
Okay, I think I'm with you. The point of failure factory is to light a match. It should outrage you. And so if you're the local population, carry that passion and demand change. That's the only way it can be done.
The local people have to demand the change. Or, as I point out in the book, you don't let it get that bad. Don't let it get to a Baltimore City stage. Address it much quicker. And I'll give you an example. So in one section of the book, it was like in a whole chapter, I go through school board policies, right? Which is probably the least sexy topic in the world, school board policies. Nobody looks at
Right.
school board
Tell me
policy.
more.
But yeah, keep going. And
Yeah.
the thing with the school board policies are they are unbelievably important in understanding where your school system is. So
Mhm.
what I do is I take the policies as they're written in Baltimore City and I show you them. And I say, if you see something like this in your local school board policy, you probably wouldn't even look twice at it. But it is incredibly important. This is a sign that your school system is failing academically, failing
Mm.
to properly educate the kids. And they're trying to do things to pass more kids without educating those kids. And I'll give you an example. So Baltimore City has this thing called a 50% rule. And if
Mm.
you were to read it in the policies, you probably wouldn't even think twice about it. But what the 50% rule says is that a student cannot receive below a 50% for a marking period or semester grade. Doesn't matter if they never come to school, don't take any tests, don't hand in any homework assignment, take no quizzes. They could miss the first 50 days of school, but they would get a 50%. Now, in Baltimore City schools, a passing grade is a 60. A 60 is a D minus, and they start
Mhm.
every kid, regardless of anything, at a 50. Now, the
Mm.
reason that was put into place was because Baltimore City wanted to pass more students. Too many students were failing. So the answer
Mm.
was not to better educate the kids. The answer was to simply give them half credit no matter what happens. And now let's analyze that a little bit more. Well,
That's crazy.
if you can miss the first 50 days of school or 60 or 70 or 80 days of school, but you now have a 50, all you have to do is earn 10 points, get to a 60, and you pass
Mm.
the class. So in
Mm.
order to pass a class in Baltimore City, or if your school system has a 50% rule, a
And Lord
student
knows what it takes to get to those 10 points from 50.
yeah,
It
right?
probably ain't much.
It probably isn't much. All you got to do is earn 10% out of a 100-point scale and you pass a class. So I show readers what the language looks like for the 50% rule so you can look up your own school board policy and see if you have it.
Mm.
And then I have other examples in the book of other things in school board policies that you can look for that are just like the 50% rule, which are school systems trying to pass more students without educating them, because educating kids is harder. Just changing their grade and pushing them along,
Right.
that's easy.
Yeah, so we're talking about a mass production, Campbell's soup operation versus educating the future of our children, educating our future, which, as you pointed out so well, is so important for so many reasons.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's
So
like
it
like a
takes,
Campbell soup factory, right? It's like a factory.
yeah, yeah, exactly, right on,
Yeah.
exactly. Wow. Well, thank you so much for enlightening me about this. I guess you've angered me a little bit, and so I don't know. Maybe I should get in touch with some people in Baltimore. It sounds like something needs to be done. As of right now, nothing's changed, huh? Is this where
Oh,
your research is still, or what are you working on these days?
well, a lot has changed. There's been a lot that has changed. And
Oh,
there's
tell me
been
if you don't mind.
Oh, sure. So there's stories that we have done that have passed state laws. When we did the whole grade changing investigation over 5 years, Baltimore City Schools completely revamped its grading processes, changed the entire thing because we pointed out what was happening. So they rewrote it all. And I would argue that perhaps part of the reason that the high school graduation rate hasn't changed is because they might not be just passing kids as much as they used to. So
Right.
because over 8 years, they've hired 1,300 additional employees and
Right.
got
They're putting
400
in the
million.
work.
Yeah.
Optimistically, they're putting in the work to get there.
Yeah, so they might not be changing the grades as much as they used to, which may be an indication of why the graduation
Right.
rate hasn't increased. But so there's been a lot of that stuff. The court case that we went to, that we sued Baltimore City Schools over, that set legal precedent throughout the entire state. That was a massive victory for taxpayers and a massive victory for transparency, because there's not many public records lawsuits, because a lot of people don't want to file them because they're expensive. You're not guaranteed to win. And if you do win, you're not guaranteed to get your attorney's fees paid for. But when that happened with us, the ruling from that judge was monumental throughout the entire state. And there is now a pathway. There's this legal precedent that is showing people how to defeat the government when it comes to these types of public record stuff. So, in Failure Factory, we talk about all the good things that have happened, but what isn't happening is that the student educational outcomes are increasing. And the reason it's not happening is because of what we talked about. The public officials in Baltimore City are simply giving the school system the money, but not expecting that the taxpayers get a return on that investment, which would be a better educated student. So to answer the other part of your question, yeah, we're still here, man. We're still doing this every single day. We're reporting on the public education system. Now, it started in 2017 when Failure Factory begins. It really started with Baltimore City, and then it has branched out to include the counties around Baltimore City, and now we really cover public education throughout the entire state, because this isn't just a city issue. This is happening everywhere. And Baltimore is very similar to the rest of the country. So you have a really blue areas, and then you have really red areas. And it's happening through all of that. And it's something that we have to correct, because I make the argument in the book that Baltimore is really in the end stages of what a failing public education system does to a community. And Baltimore is a struggling city. It used to have nearly 1 million people. Now it's down to 550,000. And at current trends, it'll be under 500,000 in a couple years. It's consistently one of the most dangerous crime-ridden cities, not just in America, but in the Western Hemisphere. 20 to 25% of the people live in poverty. There's very few economic opportunities. It's a struggling city. And I make the case that those things are not the problem. Those things are a symptom of the problem. The problem is that for years and decades, a very expensive school system has been draining taxpayer dollars and not properly educating the citizens of the city. That's the problem. We cannot allow this to continue to happen. Now, Baltimore, it's going to take some monumental changes at the ballot box for Baltimore to change. However, the reason I wrote Failure Factory is we don't want more Baltimores, and we can stop them.
So a lighthouse, a spotlight on what's happening in Baltimore. It's a tragic case, it sounds like, and a lighthouse, hopefully, for other cities. Interesting. Yeah, it's a great title. I was thinking as you were just speaking, Vampire School. That would be a cool title too, right? But that's the point. It's really this parasitic, terrible thing, and to think that it is the root cause of so much of the problems is maddening. It's like you go, oh, geez, well, we need to fix this problem then. And so it's a stark warning. And so thank you so much for doing that.
And I will say it's fixable. This is
fixable.
So
that's what my final question was going to be. Are you optimistic? Can we fix it?
Yeah, I think we have to be. Now in Baltimore, it's a little harder to be optimistic, because the public school system has been failing for so long. And what you never see are the public officials, the elected officials, demanding better. You don't see that. But what I'm optimistic about is that educating people around the country with my book, Failure Factory, like we're doing right now, and having people read it and having people share the ideas and talk about it and simply say, I'm not going to allow this to happen to my community. And it's really not that hard to not allow it to happen to your community. The very first thing you got to do is that you got to vote for people that are going to give the schools money and then hold them accountable for how they spend the money. You have to hold them accountable. And if you're going to give them a 30% increase over 8 years and the graduation rate doesn't budge, perhaps somebody should say, maybe we need new leadership. Maybe we got to have somebody in here who's going to try some different things. We got to be able to do that. And if you have those people that are willing to push back, and you have those elected officials that are willing to do that, that's monumental. And I'll say this, where you see that happening is where you see better schools, where you see people and where you see public officials and the community that are not tolerating a lack of achievement in public schools is where you have better public schools. And it makes sense, because if you're making $500,000 a year and 10% of your kids are proficient and your boss, the mayor essentially, is saying, yeah, I'm okay with that, what's the motivation to get better?
Couldn't be more clear. Wow. Oh, I had something that was so smart, but then it just escaped me as you were making it. No, it couldn't be more clear. It's about, oh yeah, it was about will. I just remembered, thank goodness. Will, the difference here is will, okay, among the population, to hold people accountable. And it's a reminder, this issue, education being so locally driven, purely locally driven, basically, reminds me, as I've spoken to people over the years about, it's really all about local politics. Who cares about the federal Trump and Biden and this and that? And so to hear you make this case is actually kind of was like waking me up and going, hey, really got to, who you're ticking off on that ballot. So important to be informed and to vote and to just take personal accountability as a citizen. So interesting perspective.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing your knowledge with me. It's been a real honor.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, man. Thank you so much.
Yep. Well, you have a great evening, and
for having me
we'll
on.
Connect soon.
What I hope is that people do pick up a copy of Failure Factory. Yes, sir.
Absolutely. I'll be encouraging people to do that as I share it on wherever I share it. So thanks again so much, and have a great evening. Talk to you soon.